How are you feeling? How long have you been here?
3 months, May 17th.
And what brought you?
That's difficult to answer.
Eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital.
That's difficult to answer.
this the end? There's a noise inside my head of crying people facing death. Is this the end? Is this the end? Oh, I'm burning in the stone. There's no place to hide. I'm burning in the stone. What have we done to the world? What have we done to the world? I'm burning in the stone. There's no place to hide. I'm burning in the stone. This is the final
Marky got with Sharon, and Sharon got Sharia. She was sharing Sharon's outlook on the topic of disease. Mikey had a facial scar and Bobby was a racist. They were all in love with dying, they were doing it in Texas. Tommy played piano like a kid out in the rain, and then he lost his leg in Dallas. He was dancing with the train. They were all in love with dying, they were drinking from a fountain that was pouring like an avalanche coming down the mountain.
I don't mind the sun sometimes, the images it shows. I can taste you on my lips and smell you in my clothes.
Yeah, exactly. One of James's simps actually tweeted that. Are you fucking me? It's getting so crazy. You know what's funny is I was watching another show on Rumble before this, and it's like I was waiting for an interview to come on that never happened. And there was this guy in the chat that I haven't even thought about literally in years. He's a libertarian guy, and I don't really know that much about him, but I knew of him. He has like 100,000 followers on Twitter. And so this show, I guess, is on his network, which I didn't know when I started watching it. And so he saw me in the chat, and he's like, "Hey, Carlin, it's been a long time." I was like, "Hi, Austin. What are you doing here?" And he was like, "Hey, you really drove James Lindsay crazy, didn't you?" And I was like,
Credit. Yes.
I was like, people saw. Like, you respected my work. I worked
Thank
so
you.
hard at this.
Thank you.
This was a year and a half of effort. This was a group effort to drive James crazy, to finally break him, and we did it. And I just feel like we haven't gotten the credit that we rightfully deserve.
I wrote
So
a
many-
speech. Hang on, I got a speech.
Yeah, so many
Don't start playing the music yet. Wait a minute.
So many people have worked so hard to bring this moment about, and I'm just so grateful for the love and support of everyone. And I don't want to name any names because I'll forget people, and the Oscar music is about to play me out, but this is just, I say thank you guys. Thank you for this moment. Thank you.
Totally. This belongs to all of us.
This belongs to all of us. We all won this award together.
Thank you for the golden dildo.
Yeah.
He's calling out cults and conspiracies wild. Gnostic sex cults and theories compiled. But one question's raised and it's blocked on the spot. No room for dissent in the world he's got. But the crowd starts to laugh. They're starting to see a whole lot of words that just don't agree. Oh, Emperor James, are you feeling the breeze? Might wanna look down, see what's caught at the knees. He's the Emperor with no clothes, strutting around like nobody knows, shouting loud, thinking he's wise, but he's bearing it all to everyone's eyes. He's the Emperor, yeah, with no disguise, slipped down by his own price. The fat is an intellectual line. Oprah's got mind control, powers divine. He's calling Saint Michael the devil in charge, and telling the Catholics they got it too large. Oh, James, don't you know it's a tricky game when you're calling out folks, but you're doing the same. You say it's a truth only you understand, but the crowd's got a mirror showing just where you stand. He's the Emperor with no clothes, strutting around like nobody knows, shouting loud, thinking he's wise, but he's bearing it all to everyone's eyes. He's the Emperor, yeah, with no disguise, stripped down by his own pride. Start to fade and the truth comes around. His theories unravel like threads on the ground. The court starts to giggle, the people all cheer, for the Emperor's naked, the truth's finally here. He's the Emperor with no clothes, strutting around like nobody knows, shouting loud, thinking he's wise, but he's bearing it all to everyone's eyes. He's the Emperor, yeah, with no disguise, stripped down by his own pride. So here's to the lesson, let's give it a toast to emperors walking in nothing but boast. Join Carlin's cult and open your eyes. She's here to expose James's epic lies.
What up, what up, what up, everyone? Welcome to the cult. Happy Wednesday. Wait, it's Wednesday, right? Yeah, it's Wednesday. I'm pretty sure it's Wednesday. Hey, we're early today. And we're early today for a very good reason, and I'm going to tell you what that reason is. But first, I want to thank Brian for becoming a member of the channel. Brian, we appreciate you. Brian showed up the other day, and he started owning the libs in my chat, and I gently reprimanded him, and I said, don't do that shit here. And what I appreciated about Brian is that he not only stopped doing the thing that I asked him to stop doing to do because it drives me insane. He also apologized, which he didn't need to do, but it was nice. And then he started listening and he started asking really good questions, and now he's a member of the channel. See? Doesn't always have to be a fight, guys. Doesn't always have to be a fight. doesn't always have to be like, if I'm asking you to do something, I'm not trying to be mean. I'm not trying to make you feel bad. I'm not trying to do any of those things. I'm just saying I do a very specific thing on this channel, and that is I teach people, and I need to create an environment that is conducive to education, not that is conducive to shitposting and outrage porn on the internet. And once you understand the method to my madness, you will understand, because it works, and we actually know stuff that no one else on the internet knows, because no one else pays attention but us. Kev, I don't know what you're talking about with the YouTube chat being disabled. I'm seeing people in the YouTube chat, so I don't know, bro. I don't know. Maybe try reloading. Maybe trying turning it off and turning it back on. I don't really know what to say about that. All right, so we are a little bit early today. And the reason that we're a little bit early is that I found out that our favorite socialists over at Haymarket Books, there it is, they are hosting a live stream in T-minus 42 minutes called Blood in the Face, White Nationalism from the Birth of a Nation to the Age of Trump. We can't not watch this live. It's at 5 o'clock. That's when we normally go live. It's perfect. This is a stream that was meant for us. So we're gonna watch this live, and hopefully they'll have a chat. And hopefully we can go and very, very, very nicely ask them questions and not be disruptive at all, because we are never disruptive in other people's chats. We only go in and we ask one question each that is highly relevant to what's going on, or at least one question at a time. And then we don't spam them. We don't cause problems. We don't call them names. We don't shitpost. We don't do any of that. All we do is we go and we ask questions that are highly relevant to whatever is being discussed, and we are on our best behavior. And because we play it totally straight, it drives them even more insane. Just gotta play it straight. You don't need to be fancy. You don't need to be a dick. You don't need to try to hurt someone's feelings. Just playing it straight, oftentimes, this is a pro tip if you want to trigger someone, not just socialists. Most of the time, playing it straight is actually the worst psychological fuckery that you can do to someone. It's like, because they're waiting for you to do something underhanded, and they keep revving themselves up in their own heads. And that's really the art of the trigger, if I'm being honest about it. The Art of the Trigger is a book I want to write at some point. I actually have a website dedicated to it, believe it or not, I really do. And the art of a good trigger is that all you need to do is plant a nugget, but a seed in someone's head. And then you just need to step back and let the seed grow. Because you don't need to do anything at that point. You just need to let them be their own worst enemy, and usually people are. And they rev up stories in their head that are so much worse than anything that you could ever come up with. They drive themselves insane. Anyway, I don't know how I got on that tangent about triggering, but don't fuck around in people's chats. That's the point. We don't need to be the dick. All we need to do is show up and ask relevant questions, and then we look like the good and reasonable people, and they drive themselves crazy, and that is the worst possible thing we can do, and we will be doing that in about 40 minutes at 5 o'clock. However, something else happened that I wanted to watch this. So I didn't know this, but apparently James gave a speech to PragerU a couple weeks ago, and I wasn't really paying attention, so I never saw him post about this or nothing, and I don't pay attention to PragerU at all anymore. But clips from this speech have started making the rounds on Twitter. And James says some of the most cringe-worthy bullshit I've ever heard in my life. And he does it so seriously. Like, James is an excellent example of the art of the trigger philosophy, which is that all you need to do is plant a nugget of something and you drive other people insane. Because James had a nugget planted in his head from Nick Fuentes and the Groypers. And then, based on the sheer virtue of mean tweets that James didn't have to read, that James didn't have to interact with, James very literally drove himself insane. And yeah, we take some credit for that too. We started trying to drive James insane from other angles. But some of the things I heard James say from this speech are just hilarious. when you are actually hinged into reality. And so I wanted to watch the whole thing, and I thought I would do it on stream, and then I found out, oh, Socialists are live at 5 p.m., and so that is why we're live a little bit early. We're live at 4 p.m., so I can watch the speech. And there's something else I want to talk about too, because actually there was someone else went undercover at a queer conference. I'm actually really excited about this. I don't know who Brian is, but apparently Brian Harrison is a Texas state representative. And Brian Harrison found himself undercover at a queer conference. Now, I don't think he understands that it's a queer conference. I think, like most conservatives, he thinks this is about transing the kids or sexualizing the kids, when we know, because we watch queer Marxists all the time, we watch queer theory all the time, we know exactly what Brian walked into. And he walked into a radical revolutionary anarcho-communist queer conference, and he just doesn't know that because no one has taught him this. It's not his fault. It's the fault of the people who are meant to educate conservatives who don't do their job. But we know what this is. And I just wanted to show you what Brian found, because he actually did post some really good queer materials for us. Look at this. He posted a bunch of pictures, and I got to give props. I mean, you guys remember we had that instance of someone going viral on Twitter a couple months ago for saying, I went to a secret Antifa meeting and recorded it. And then we were like, okay, can you release the recording because we want to know what Antifa said? And they refused, and they threw a giant hissy fit and all that stuff. What Brian did, State Representative Harrison, I don't want to be disrespectful, what Brian did is he took photos and he released them, and he's going viral on Twitter for it, and good for him. He should be. The more people who see this stuff, the better. But he's doing the correct thing, which is you go undercover at the event, you get a bunch of evidence, you put it on the internet so that other people can learn from it, and we can all see what's going on at all these secret events all over the country. So check this out. Transcendence, a century of black queer ecstasy. We know what transcendence means. The reason that I say that Brian went to a queer conference and not a trans conference is that trans for queer activists means transition. It means transition from man to woman or woman to man. The ultimate goal of queer activism, of course, is to abolish the gender binary and also the nuclear family via the gender binary. They want to abolish all gender. They don't want people transitioning from one gender to the other gender, because that is still an acknowledgement of the gender binary. What they want is to transcend gender or transform gender. So when you go to a lot of like these queer conferences, if you're seeing stuff about transcendence or transforming, just know that when they say trans, they don't mean transition from man to woman or woman to man. They mean transcend the gender binary. Transform the gender binary, which means get rid of it altogether. Non-binary means no binary, and the binary, of course, is men and women, and we cover that stuff all the time on the channel. But anyway, look at the very first picture that Brian posts. Transcendence. This is how we know it's a queer conference, and we didn't even need to see queer ecstasy on the banner because we already knew it was a queer conference. Found the agenda for day one, keeping time, queer crip temporal attunement through tarot. Does everyone know what queer crip is? Crip is a reference to disability studies, this is, what is disability theory really? I mean, that's a great question. So we actually don't cover disability studies as much. We should probably get into more of it. So disability studies, or critical disability theory, or CRIP theory as we're seeing it here, it is a subset of queer theory. Essentially, the whole idea of queer theory is that there is normative, that means norms that uphold capitalism, and and then they are against normativity, so anti-normative. So queer is going to be an anti-normative ideology, again, with normative being norms that uphold capitalism. When it comes to disability studies, what they're going to tell you is that the normative thing is for an able-bodied person, a person that can walk around and that doesn't have any, neurodivergence or anything like that. They don't need to be in a wheelchair. They aren't an amputee. They don't have a chronic illness. Able body is considered normative. What is considered queer or crip is anything that is not able-bodied, but most often they're not even referring to a physical illness or ailment. Most of the time they're referring to autism. Most of the time they're referring to neurodivergence, but that is almost always a reference to autism. And guess what? Their autism is almost entirely self-diagnosed. So yeah, disability justice, crip studies comes under queer theory. This is a great way to put it. Your able-bodiedness means productivity. That's why it relates to capitalism. You're able to be a better contributor to the capitalist normative system. That's both a cultural and an economic model. We've talked about that in other places. So if this were true equity, we would all be disabled, kind of like Harrison Bergeron. Well, everyone was disabled in Harrison Bergeron, weren't they? They had forced disability via the state so that everyone could be at the same level. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way before, Tom, but you might be right. So they got queer crip theory going on. That must have been a fun presentation. Walking in with the catering staff, I arrived in time to hear some of the presentation. I bore a hell within me, a narrative femicide and reproduction of Frankenstein. I would kill to hear a recording of this presentation. I would kill for it. After listening to as much as I could handle, I began walking around campus. Resources for trans folks, including medical transitioning. And this, by the way, all of this shit goes against Trump's executive orders. I hope everyone understands that. Like, this is the University of Texas, government-funded institution in a red state. I am so sick of people saying this doesn't happen in red states. It does happen in red states. University of Texas. This is all against Trump's executive orders. All of this is actually not allowed right now. How to use pronouns. Oh, we love this one. Is God a submissive or a dominant? Now, because we've been watching queer kink workshops recently, and no, we're not watching sex or anything like that, but they do non-sexual kink-related workshops because queer people are obsessed with kink. They're obsessed with BDSM, and the reason they're obsessed with kink and the reason they're obsessed with BDSM, and I swear to God, this is the truth, it is not actually about sex. What they are doing is they are playing out the power dynamics of capitalism via kink and BDSM. So they're consensually playing out the power dynamics of capitalism. Why do we know this? Because we've literally watched them talk about it in their seminars. And so it sounds weird, but this is not about them just like wanting to get off and wanting to get laid and wanting to do kinky stuff. What they are playing with here is God, a sub, or a dom. They're talking about the power dynamics of capitalism, but they're doing it in an inflammatory way because they are queering what it means to talk about this stuff. But this one caused a little bit of a stir that I thought was interesting. Using the interrelationships between, I don't know how to say that, attributes in Islamic theory to reflect upon themes of pain and pleasure in kink and BDSM. We literally just watched a presentation for Spy Stream, for the Spy Stream that my supporters have, where we went inside a queer rope workshop, and I have this all on video, where an Islamic woman got tied up with her hijab. And there were all sorts of other political symmetry around this whole kind of played out thing where they took the hijab off and they put a gag in her. I swear to God, they were all clothed and it wasn't sexual. They put a gag in her mouth and then they tied her all up with the hijab and they hung her over a prayer mat, and it was supposed to be symbolic of the oppressive ideology of Islam. This is how I know explicitly about this. This is not even about, like, this is literally using, like, kink and BDSM to make political statements and to be subversive. That's what this is about. Because we just watched a presentation about it not too long ago. Trans convening against disposability, trans care and lessons from disability justice. I would kill to hear these recordings. We have to read this book, Terrorizing Gender, Transgender Visibility, and the Surveillance Practices of the Security State. Oh, wow, that's queer Marxism all over it, isn't it? They've got the flags all over the place. They've got stickers. I want to know what this this is already passed. See, I want to go through and I want to look up these speakers, and I want to try to find these speakers and find them on videos talking about other things. Look at ciscentrism, transmisogyny, colorism, sizeism, biphobia, and transphobia gather around combating trans, misogynoir, and queer phobia. I'm going to bet Brian doesn't know what any of those words mean, and God bless him for putting himself through this. Like, truly, I don't mean that with any disrespect. I'm just saying that this all means queer. more flags. And this is all coming out of the Gender and Sexuality Center at the University of Texas, so that's going to go over real well for them. They've got a whole bookcase of trans and queer books. What can I do with a gender studies degree? That's a good question. That's a good question. All this stuff still being taught at the... See, this is all the University of Texas at Austin, guys. This is not legal for them to be teaching this. It's against Trump's executive order. They're going to get their funding pulled for this if they don't fix it, which I think is pretty great. Brian also continued to post... that's not the one I wanted. This one. Brian also continued to post this. Check this out. Hello, Jules Gill Peterson. Non-medical transition resource guide, a resource guide for ways to trans your gender without HRT and accessible mind. We hear queer activists talk about this all the time. The reason that queer activists don't need to medically transition is because they're not trying to transition from man to woman or woman to man. To be queer is to not be a man or a woman or woman to man. So they don't actually have to do anything to their body. To be queer is a lifestyle choice. It is a political philosophy. They are choosing to live outside the system. They are choosing to live an anti-normative lifestyle. Bro, if you're not here to learn, you don't have to be here. We are here to learn, and we take this seriously. If you don't take this seriously, you can go somewhere else. I promise you, if you don't want us to talk about what the far left is saying, you won't last more than 5 minutes on this channel. So that's why they're saying a non-medical transition resource guide, because they don't believe in medical transition, because it's not about going from man to woman or woman to man. It is about transcending gender or transforming gender, living outside the binary. They do that in other ways. No, it doesn't. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put you in a timeout, and you're going to be timed out. Well, I'll give you a mini timeout at first. If you want to come back and continue to post like you're posting and not listening, I'm just going to time you out for the rest of the stream. And then you can sit and listen, and you can learn. But you're not going to shitpost in my chat. It's against the rules. So he goes through all of this: voice training, binding, what to do if you can't buy a chest binder. I mean, this is all produced by queer activists. Tucking, packing. Look at this. All non-medical transition. And I have to, again, I have to give him credit because he is a state representative in Texas. I am calling to completely defund the University of Texas unless they immediately terminate the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies Department, their LGBT studies, and the DEI programs. Yes. Yes, Brian Harrison. Yes. Yes. We salute you. Brian, he walked into the belly of the beast. He was around all the queer insanity. I've been undercover at many of these events. I know exactly what that's like. And look at how quickly he took action. How beautiful. You mean to tell me a Republican politician saw something insane? The same stuff that we've been watching for years and years and years and screaming about, and no one effing listens to us? But a Republican politician finally got clued in. He went undercover. He saw what was happening for himself. He took a bunch of pictures and he did something about it. Oh, I sent him a DM on Twitter. Whether he answers me is I sent him a very nice DM. I hope he does answer me. I would like to start. Part of what I'm going to be doing this year is I'm going to be doing more outreach to try to teach people about stuff like this, because like I keep saying, people don't understand. We are about to see a massive resurgence in queer activism. I promise you. A massive, massive, massive resurgence. So I hope he answers. If he doesn't, that's okay, because he still did a pretty good job with this whole thing. So we appreciate that. One last thing, though. There was someone who didn't like that. Do you guys remember the Jewess? Angela Vanderplume. The Jewess that is best friends with James Lindsay, that was on that show with James Lindsay and Rabbi Barclay. Does everyone remember the Jewess? Well, the Jewess Angela hates Muslims. Hates Muslims. This woman hates Muslims. And so the Jewess Angela saw what Brian was posting, and she zoomed in on it, and she's like, we need to all hate Muslims now together because Muslims are queer. Well, the Jewess hadn't blocked my Queer Marxism account yet. And so I responded to the Jewess and I said, as the Queer Marxism Project, at Queer Marxism on Twitter, it's intellectually dishonest to make this all about her hating Muslims when it's not. That was a little typo on my part. When queer Marxists are talking about kink and BDSM, they are talking about using sex to explore the power dynamics of capitalism consensually. This is from a queer organization. We all recognize this. This was produced by the organization that we watched that queer rope workshop from. And it explains it explicitly. Queer is about power dynamics. That's what this is. BDSM is about power dynamics. It's about acting out the power dynamics. And so then Angela responded to me. And listen, I thought I was perfectly nice, perhaps a little antagonistic, but I thought I was perfectly nice, and I provided primary source evidence. Angela, the Jewess, responded to me and said, "You need to read what I wrote and what is being taught again, because your comment makes zero sense when you do." Because Angela is desperate to hate Muslims, and she wants everyone to hate Muslims because she is a Zionist Jewess, and she does nothing but hate on Muslims. Where did I say she hates Islam? No, I meant you, Angela. That was my typo. I meant Angela hates Islam because she does. She is teaching it under the umbrella of Islamic ideology, which is hilarious. And I responded and I said, "It makes sense when you understand queer ideology, which you do not. You're looking at it from your lens of hating Muslims and interpreting it through that. Perhaps if you did more research, you could better grapple with what you're seeing outside of your confirmation bias." Another typo, man, I was having a bad morning. And she says, "You're an idiot. You do not understand that, yes, they are reaching under this queer Marxist theory, but they are trying to normalize it via Islam." So this Jewish bitch thinks they're trying to normalize queer theory through Islam. James Lindsay's best friend. This is the level of intellect that we get on this side of the internet, okay? But it's still funny. And Islam is very strict when it comes to this. So then why did I see two queer people engaging in a BDSM roleplay exercise using a hijab, Angela? And I have it on video. And then she says, "Fuck off." And then she checked my profile and she said, and she realized it was me. And she said, "How many accounts of yours do I have to block, Carlin? You fat fucking nerd." Again, James Lindsay's audience showing that the best intellectual argument that they can make is, "You're fat." They're completely incapable of reading primary source evidence. They're completely incapable of grappling with primary source evidence. All they do is hurl insults when they can't follow what's actually going on. And so now, speaking of James, let's get into our pre-show. We have 20 minutes before the Socialists are live. If you guys are here for Socialism Live, that starts at 5 p.m. We are going to pregame with a little talk that James Lindsay gave for PragerU a couple weeks ago, I guess. Let me just get my setup here. Guys, please make sure you mount the like button for me if you would be so kind. Please make sure you subscribe to the channel if you have not already. And let's see what James had to say to PragerU.
Author, the president of New Disclosures, and the star of 3 5-minute videos.
New Disclosures? That actually sounds way cooler than New Discourses. Couldn't even get his company right.
Please welcome to the stage author, the president of New Disclosures, and the star of 3 5-minute videos with a total viewership of over 7 million views, James Lindsay.
I did not know I have 7 million views. That's a lot of views. So I'm going to set a timer. That's for your safety. Thank you, Marissa, PragerU, for inviting me. Of course, we all hope and pray the best for Dennis. Thank you, Tiffany, for actually giving me a warm-up back, because as a lot of you know, some of you know my brand. Not everybody knows my brand. I'm getting tired of all of these very down in the dumps, pessimistic, down low talks we've heard today. So I'm going to give the cheerful one. Or the opposite. Because I'm very worried about America. And to my credit, I didn't know this was an education event till I got here. So I prepared a completely different talk. But it's pretty much the same. Because here's the truth. Here's the truth. We can be as much at Disneyland, conservative Disneyland, as we want to be. But I want to remind you, I'm the guy that reminds you that Disneyland is in Los Angeles and Los Angeles is on fire, and that fire was probably set on purpose.
Oh no, we know where this is going. Oh
Because
no.
here's the truth. President Trump is entering the White House tomorrow.
Also
probably.
in January.
We know how things go. And our schools are lost.
Wait, so this was in January. So this was 2 months ago. Can we just reflect on for a moment on how many meltdowns James Lindsay has had since he gave this talk on Twitter? Or how many meltdowns on Twitter? He gave the talk in PragerU, whatever. But how many meltdowns he's had on Twitter?
It does not matter who the president of the United States is. If we do not fix education, America lives or dies. And I mean that. This is not hyperbole. America lives or dies based on education.
Yeah, that's true. That's right.
Because as Tiffany said, teeing me up without meaning to, the great dictators of history, and I mean great in size, not in quality, the great dictators of history understood. The quote that she referenced from Hitler was, "He who gets the youth gains the future." Lenin said, "Give me your children for 4 years, I'll plant a seed so deep you'll never uproot what grows." If we stop everything that the left has done in our country, the immigration, all the other problems, and leave education unfixed, not only are we going to be certain to go back to where we are in no time, where we were headed, but we might not even get out of the hole we're in.
Yeah, James is right.
Because
about
let me
that.
tell you the truth, our
True.
children are not being educated.
True.
They are not being educated. They cannot read on average,
True.
at grade level at least. They're not that interested in learning to read. They cannot do mathematics. They are ignorant of history. They are illiterate in the sciences. And they're being force-fed a diet of entitlement from left and right on the internet, because who's educating them today is not the school that's using the Paulo Freirean methods that Marissa mentioned earlier to hijack and steal their education, to radicalize them in place of learning. Where they are learning is TikTok. Where they are learning is now Xiaohongshu. Do you know what that means? Little Red Book. You ever heard of that? They call it Red Note, and your kids are going to it in droves.
He's angry.
I just saw a headline 5 minutes ago. As Tiffany was taking the stage, I glanced at my phone. According to Thanks to President Trump is the headline, TikTok is now going to be unbanned in America. It was banned for a day. Your children are being radicalized by foreign powers and domestic communists and fascists who want to destroy this nation. And if we do not correct their educations, we will lose this country, full stop. That's where we are. I'm sorry to be the downer of the party. Marissa said it's a roller coaster. There's up, there's down. She didn't tell you there's hairpin turn. I don't know if you spend as much time on the internet as I do. God, I hope you don't. But what's on there right now is positively horrifying. I mentioned TikTok. I mentioned Red Note. I didn't mention Instagram, and I didn't mention X. Let me tell you what my Instagram experience is like. My algorithm is really interesting.
This is the part
About
I
every
saw.
third thing, and I have no idea why. I don't click on this stuff. About every third thing I get is a racist joke.
Okay, can we just reflect on that for a moment? James is saying he doesn't click on anything, and yet the algorithm still feeds him this stuff. According to James, I am a literal Nazi, according to him. He has called me a Nazi. He said that I said I loved Hitler when I never said that. He said all sorts of things about me that we're not going to rehash right now, but one of the things he said is that I'm a literal Nazi. Do you know what I see when I go on my Instagram? I see claw games at the arcade. I see purses. I see royal things. I see things about cooking. I see animal videos. I've been getting a lot of reptile videos lately because I watch alligator videos, but now I've started getting snake videos, and I don't like snakes, But, you know, some of the snakes are kind of pretty and the colors are cool and all that. I occasionally see knitting. I don't see racist stuff on Instagram at all. And do you know why? Because I don't engage with that content. What you see on Instagram is a reflection of the content that you yourself are engaging in. No one is responsible for what you see in an algorithm other than you. So I don't believe James for one red second. Instagram is just completely taken over by racists. No, James. That's the type of content that you're interacting with, which is why you're seeing it more. I don't even click on anything. It just gives it to me. Bullshit.
I didn't mention Instagram and I didn't mention X. Let me tell you what my Instagram experience is like. My algorithm is really interesting. About every third thing, and I have no idea why, I don't click on this stuff. About every third thing I get is a racist joke. About every third thing on my Instagram feed is a racist joke right now.
Your fault.
Used to be dancing girls. Bring back the hot chicks. My Twitter feed is split into thirds. Right now, it changes every 2 days. It's 1/3 pro-CCP propaganda.
Wait, James literally used a speech to complain about what he sees on Twitter? Like, this is like old man yelling at the sky. It's like, let me tell you what I saw on Twitter this morning. Like, are you kidding me? Who does this? You have a chance to give a speech and you complain about your Twitter feed?
My Twitter feed is split into thirds. Right now, it changes every 2 days. It's 1/3 pro-CCP propaganda, 1/3 pro-Nazi propaganda, and 1/3 this kind of what in the hell's going on. We are in a very dangerous place in this country. So let me just tell you, this is a weird room for me to get to give this lecture, and I've been in this room one other time in my life, 5 years ago. February, actually, of 2020. And I spoke to a equally distinguished but somewhat smaller room of people standing roughly in this exact spot. And I told them, February 25th, 2020, that a Chinese cultural revolution was going to kick off in America using critical race theory as the tool. Within 6 months, George Floyd died 3 months later to the day, and they laughed me off. I'm reading this book as I fly in to come here. It's called An Account Rendered, a dossier on my former self by Molita Moshman, who was radicalized in 1933 to become a Nazi. Her best friend was a Jew.
Oh my God.
And she wrote a letter to her Jewish childhood friend after she got over her madness in the late 1950s, trying to explain her radicalization. And she talked about the love of country being exploited to turn them to evil. The enthusiasm for the energy of moving forward that was exploited to turn them to evil. To the generational divide, does this ring true or what? To the generational divide that the young no longer want to listen to the old. Okay, boomer, you have boomer mentality. That's
James is saying we're about to have a Nazi revolution in this country because people are too proud of their country and they want their country to put them first. And that's going to lead to a Nazi revolution.
Boomer theology. Boomer is a mentality. It's not an age. It's not a generation. We're in this place again. And I'm very, very afraid.
He is. Yeah.
And it's very weird, maybe providential. I'm making this statement in this room, given this history I have in this room today. 3 months. And America is going to be tested like it has never been tested. And we are going to face a lurch from our young people into Nazi ideology, into anti-Israel hate, into anti-Jewish sentiment, into racism like we have not seen in decades, maybe ever.
So this was 2 months ago. So James's 3-month deadline on the United States descending into Nazism is about a month away. Hey, it might even be my birthday. My birthday is coming up. Is it possible that James is trying to provoke this so that he can be right and he can make more money because he was right? Is it possible that all of James's Twitter bullshit for months and months and months, and his speeches saying we're literally going to have a Nazi revolution in this country if you guys don't do something about it, which is just the most unhinged thing I've ever heard. And I hang out with the Groypers. There's not going to be any Groyper revolution in a month. I'll tell you that. Like, what's going to happen in the next month is Nick is going to do his show, and the Groypers are going to enjoy that, and Nick is going to say stuff on the internet that's spicy, and the Groypers are going to enjoy that. No one's having a Nazi revolution in this country in the next month. Is it possible that James is trying to provoke this with all of his online bullshit so that he can say he was right? Would that really surprise anyone, given the unhinged way he's been behaving for months and months and months and months and months? Would that be a surprise to anyone who understands that one of James's friends, Billboard Chris, is a Scientologist in the Sea Org who literally spent time in Scientology trying to provoke people? He was one of those people that you see in like those Scientology documentaries, and then Billboard Chris tried to ingratiate himself to the ex-Scientologist community, and then Leah Remini blocked him because he was annoying to her, and then literally the day after Leah Remini blocked Billboard Chris, Scientologist, Sea Org member who spent time provoking people in Scientology, Billboard Chris switches over to the gender critical thing where he makes an entire brand and makes himself famous off of provoking people in gender ideology because he couldn't do it in Scientology anymore, so he took Scientology tactics and applied it to gender ideology, and he is one of James's friends. And so Billboard Chris has been trying to provoke this stuff. He provokes people into fighting him. He provokes situations where he knows he's going to get arrested just so he can go viral on the internet, and he's friends with James. Is it possible that James is trying to provoke some sort of incident so that he can say, look, I was right about the Nazi revolution? It would not surprise me one little bit.
How do we stop this? I was going to start with a joke. My friend said, tell a Jewish joke. Here's the Jewish joke I picked up on the internet. Maybe you won't get it. I am paid by Israel
Literally,
to make these remarks.
Yes.
Literally, I make this joke now because what I want to say is that the values that PragerU is teaching to our children are exactly the solution to this problem. Marissa did not put me up to shilling for your organizations, what the point of the joke was.
But she did.
The values of our country, of our Bible.
By the way, Marissa is the CEO of PragerU. I've actually met her. She's very nice when you meet her. She's former IDF. She's former Israeli Defense Forces. She was in intelligence with the Israeli Defense Forces.
Of our history.
Just saying.
Are exactly what stands between us and the abyss. And we're going to be tested. And we've already lost the chance to insulate ourselves against the first wave of that test. So I implore you to support this organization. I implore you to start having brave, honest conversations. I know people are afraid, and you're wrong to be afraid. It's reasonable to be afraid, and you're wrong. It is time to make a stand. It is time to stand up for the Constitution. It's not my time. It's time to stand up for the truth. It's time to stand up for truth and goodness, biblical values, and everything that's made America great. Pray for our country. Thank you.
All right. Well, that was interesting, James. Yeah, when James talks about the Bible, I can't take him seriously because James is an atheist. He's an atheist. Why is he talking about our Bible? It's not our Bible. He is an atheist. All right, well, that was interesting. Okay, so that we've done our pregame. And guess what? The live stream is up and running for the Socialists. Let me just refresh it. And they have music going. Got a 5-minute countdown. Guys, I just want to remind people, while we have our 5-minute countdown, that if you want to support the work I'm doing, the very best way to do it is by heading over to my main Substack. That is Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. And tomorrow we're going to start doing Counter-Revolutionary Book Club on Thursdays, like consistently, because I've been doing them mostly on Thursdays anyway. It just seems to be a good day for it. And so Counter-Revolutionary Book Club is now going to be every Thursday at 5 p.m. on the Cult stream. So if you guys want to read some of the most dystopian gender ideology and queer theory with us, we will be doing that on Thursdays live at 5 p.m. And on the Substack, I posted about the next one we're going to be reading, which is going to be the Gender Accelerationist Manifesto. You can download this document. You can read ahead if you want. You can learn a little bit more about the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club. You can get access to the podcast or back episodes if you have not already. And I do have a link over to the Anarchist Library, which is where the Gender Accelerationist Manifesto lives. This is what we are going to be reading tomorrow for Counter-Revolutionary Book Club. So if you've never been, I will show you some of the craziest gender stuff you've ever seen in your life. If you want to know what the real queer activists, the real gender activists are talking about, you will not see any of this on conservative media. I promise you, they don't even know it exists, but these are the influential documents that are driving today's far left activists. So if you want to know your enemy, if you want to beat your enemy, you have to understand them. And so we are reading their documents and we are breaking them down and we are analyzing them. So you don't have to take my word for it. I didn't write this. We're just reading it and talking about it on the internet. So you can come back tomorrow at 5 p.m. and we'll be doing the Gender Accelerationist Manifesto. You can find that over on the I'm going to be changing the name of this, by the way. So kind of like preemptive announcement. Very soon, I'm going to be getting rid of the Better Discourses stuff. And the reason that I'm deciding to do that is because we won the war with James. But you guys are going to love what I'm replacing it with. And this was always the plan, by the way. This wasn't going to be the Better Discourses thing forever. I am changing the name, and that was just like a temporary thing just to needle James until we broke him. Now we've broken him. James is no longer talking about the left. And so I'm going to be transitioning over to something else. But you can always get there by going to Carlin, KARLYN.substack.com and signing up to support my work for $8 a month, $80 a year, regardless of what it's called. Will still always be crowdfunded by you guys. I'll tell you, I've got a surprise coming, bot. I've got a surprise coming. Also, actually related to the surprise, well, actually, let me show you what we're going to be watching tomorrow. We've got a couple minutes left before the Socialists go live. Let me show you what we're going to be watching tomorrow, guys. A little birdie snuck into my DMs and sent me this website, Critical Midwifery Studies. This is an actual website. It's criticalmidwiferystudies.com. And I started just trolling around and seeing, what is this? I went to the Educate Yourself section. They have an online school, Humanizing Birth. In the summer of 2022, the collective organized a summer school inviting participants from all over the world to share experiences. Now let's scroll all the way down to the bottom. They had a lot of speakers. And one of those speakers was Sophie. One of those speakers, one of the speakers in the Part 5 Futurist Perspective section was our Sophie. Sophie was a speaker at the Critical Midwifery Studies Conference. And so we will either be watching this on Friday or on Saturday. We'll definitely be watching it one of those 2 days. And so I wanted to show you guys that while we're getting ready for the stream to start. Hang on. I want to make sure I can get the chat up. Where's the chat? Hang on. You guys can't see what I see. Okay. I'm going to get this up and we're going to get the sound running. We are watching Socialism live, guys. If you've never watched Socialism with us live, it is a good day to watch Socialism with us live. This is our favorite. Why isn't this doing the chat on the side? I want the chat on the side. Let me reload. This is from our favorite socialist publishers, Haymarket Books. And they are doing a live presentation starting in about a minute called Blood in the Face, White Nationalism from Birth of a Nation to Trump. And I will put the link to the stream. But if you go over there, be on your best behavior, okay? No shit posting. I mean this. No shit posting. Everyone be good, all right? We're going to look for opportunities to ask questions. And they're just doing a promo right now, but I'll put the sound on.
You're not broke if you're taxing rich people.
We break production for profit and we replace it by production for need.
This event is brought to you by Haymarket Books. Now more than ever, it is critical to support independent publishers, independent bookstores, and independent voices. There are two ways you can do this today. First, by buying books from Haymarket at haymarketbooks.org. And secondly, by joining the Haymarket Book Club. The following event will be recorded and shared afterwards on the Haymarket Books YouTube channel. Please subscribe to the channel, like this video as many people as possible. If you like this event, be sure to catch these upcoming events in Haymarket's livestream series. You can register for these upcoming events on the Haymarket Books Eventbrite page. If you miss an event, you can listen to the recording afterward by subscribing to our podcast, Haymarket Live, wherever you get your podcasts.
Guys, as a reminder, this is a live stream, so I don't know what's going to happen, but we're going to do our best to do commentary. If you guys have questions about what's going on, please make sure you ask them. But if you're going to go over and be in their chat, please be respectful. You are representing me over there. I don't want any shitposting. I don't want any disruptions. We use this as a time to ask good and thoughtful questions about what they're talking about so we can get them to say the quiet part out loud. If we are nice to them on occasion, they answer our questions. And so please don't ruin it for everyone by causing a problem in the chat, because then they will be less inclined to say the quiet part out loud, and we will not have them on video that we can use against them forever. This is not about your feelings. This is not about getting off on shit posting in someone else's chat. We're trying to get them on video saying things we can use against them, okay? Hopefully they're starting now.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this evening.
Hello.
For this virtual launch of Blood in the Face. My name's Jean Casella, and I'm joined by David Newert and Rick Perlstein. That's Rick, not Judith Cohen. And I'm really pleased to be able to welcome them here to talk about this important and sadly extremely relevant book. I'm going to just get things going by talking a little bit about the history of the book and James Ridgway, the late investigative reporter who wrote the book, actually wrote a much earlier edition. This edition has been 40 years in the making. Jim started covering the far right in the early 1980s. He first encountered groups like the Posse Comitatus and the revived Ku Klux Klan in the Midwest while covering the 1984 presidential election, and started to hear rumblings about, the black helicopters and the government plots combined with a heavy dose of nativism, racism, and anti-Semitism.
Nativism?
And he started writing about that. He was at the Village Voice at the time, as he was for a couple of decades. And that material eventually became the first edition of Blood in the Face, which was published in 1990. I met Jim because I was the editor at the small sort of lefty publisher that published the original edition of Blood in the Face. This second edition originated when Trump was running for president, and took several years to complete. It's about 50% new material. The history remains, and even that's been updated. And then there are several new chapters at the end, bringing things up to the first Trump presidency. We really are sad that Jim isn't here to help inform us about this return to hell that we're experiencing now. But we have his book, which took a couple of years to get edited and published, but we're happy it's here now. I'm going to stop there. I'll say one more thing. I think that part of the importance of this book is to show how, past really is prologue in the United States. One thing that comes to mind is the Alien Enemies Act, which Trump is now using to deport Venezuelans to El Salvador, and is obviously increasingly going to use to import anyone who dissents from his policies. That dates back to the 1790s and was basically pioneered by Alexander Hamilton. So don't believe everything you hear in the musical about how pro-immigrant Hamilton was. He wanted these Alien and Sedition Acts passed because he was afraid of too many revolutionary French people coming over and, messing up our not very revolutionary new democracy. So there are many incidences like that in the book, which I'm sure will come up more as we go along. But I want to pass it off now to Rick Perlstein.
Thanks, Gene. I'm delighted to be here. I hadn't quite realized how important Jim Ridgway was in my own vocation until I, read this new edition
Perlstein.
And thought back to when I started getting interested in the subject of the right and the far right. I was a journalist in New York, very involved in academic stuff. I mean, if it wasn't Foucault and Derrida, I didn't want to hear about it,
Of course.
And then the 1994 election happened, and I became, just really curious and riveted by what happened. And then, I'd always listened to talk radio as kind of like a perverse kind of, almost like voyeurism. And I'd started again after the 1994 election. And by the time the Oklahoma City bombing happened on April 19th, 1995, I wasn't really all that shocked because of the rhetoric I was hearing. And so I was in New York, and Ridgway was a weekly columnist in the Village Voice. And I realized that had I not had that week by week work going through my brain about this militia movement, as we called it then, I probably wouldn't have become galvanized in the way I did. And one of the first big articles I did, feature articles in a magazine, was about scholars who were writing about the far right. And one of the things that really came across to me was, as I think David can attest, this can be very scary and dangerous work. A scholar who I interviewed talked about how the first time he met, I think it might have been someone from the Order or something like that, the guy showed off a picture of a severed head, And as I've come to appreciate, Jim Ridgway was, a reporter's reporter, right? And Gene, hearing you say that, he was just, traveling around in the Midwest in 1984 writing about the presidential election. Well, there were a lot of reporters traveling around the Midwest writing about the presidential election, but no one else was kind of getting deep enough and picking up the kind of echoes and signals enough to know that something much deeper was going on than what Ronald Reagan was up to, right? And, kind of much later in my career, my last book, when I was researching the 1980 election, it was kind of this, long story short, it was this kind of movement where there was kind of a window for a little bit more venturesome reporting, and Ridgway and his partner Alex Coburn had a regular series in which they traveled around the country writing about politics in the 1980 election. And, he went to, just to take one example, a Florida state Republican convention. And again, lots and lots of reporters from all different mainstream media outlets would have been writing about that. But he was the only one who said, wow, these people are talking about things like the Trilateral Commission. They're talking about, very weird conspiracy theories that, supposedly the right got rid of when, William F. Buckley supposedly kicked the John Birch Society out of the conservative movement. So this was a guy who always had his ear to the ground and was not stymied by this kind of consensus ideology, which holds that, American politics happens in this civilized, narrow band in the center of the political spectrum. That, America is a lot wilder and whirlier and scarier than, the sentimental narratives that we grew up hearing about will allow. So, just revisiting this stuff and revisiting him, I think what really did, struck me was, this historical section that he did on what was going on 100 years ago, exactly 100 years ago. I'll just end with one, kind of final thought. I was in New York a few months ago between the period of the presidential election and the inauguration, and I decided to go to Ellis Island. And I'm old enough to remember that Ellis Island, around the time of the Statue of Liberty, was rehabbed and reopened as a museum. I think it was 1987. And the same museum, was kind of still around then. And the story it tells about immigration during the Reagan era was very warm and positive. There was just the idea that our civic religion is about welcoming immigrants. And the story that really stuck with me from the museum
Thanks for coming over
was
the
that
channel.
they kept on passing slightly more restrictive laws, right, as the 20th century advanced, until immigration was almost entirely shut down in 1924. And one of them was passed around 1912 or 1910 or something like that. You had to have $25 in order to be allowed into the country. And you pick up a phone in the museum and you hear these people kind of doing oral histories. Someone who worked there was saying, oh yeah, they would just pass the same $25, down the line, so everyone could, claim to have $25. And, he was just kind of laughing about it. And that was the kind of welcoming attitude that was shared even by, for various reasons, Ronald Reagan and the people around him. So the devolution we've suffered since then, and the return to this kind of century-old nativism, I don't think we can really quite appreciate it in the same way without these writers and scholars like Jim and like David, who, dared almost to get beyond, again, those sentimental, celebratory narratives about America, and, just were really willing to dive down into the dangerous and scary muck and tell the real story. So I'm very grateful that this book is back in print. It's an outstanding compendium. You can almost use it as kind of like an encyclopedia. Next time you hear about some crazy person, like whether it's, Steve Bannon or Milo Yiannopoulos or, Breitbart or any of them, just look in the index and it's all right there. So,
if you think
so
that's
definitely
crazy,
2 thumbs up from me.
You got no idea. Milo Yiannopoulos mentioned.
David, I think you're muted.
Yes, I'm on now. Thanks for having me, everyone. A similar experience. I actually, Blood in the Face, I would say, was the second book that I got that turned me. It was part of my turn towards treating right-wing extremism as a beat. In the early 90s. I decided to make it my beat.
Left-wing extremism.
Actually, about mid-90s. And the first book was actually The Silent Brotherhood by Gary Gerhardt and what's his name, the second guy? Anyway, the book about the order. And as it happened, I knew the order. I was the editor of the little daily paper in Sandpoint, Idaho in the late 70s, Sandpoint Daily Bee. And I used to get letters to the editor from Robbie Matthews, the leader of the order. And we were acutely aware of him. But I and my boss, I was all 21 at the time, maybe 22 at the time we made this decision. We thought that, these guys just want attention, and we're not going to give it to them. So we thought we were making what we thought was the astute decision not to cover them. this was in, I would say, early 79.
We just didn't do our
kind
job
of-
and tell the
I and
news.
the
We just
publisher
decided
came to
what
this
was news and
decision.
what
We were gonna
wasn't.
mute the Aryan nations because we weren't going to give them the oxygen that they wanted. And
I don't like them, so
boy,
I
was
don't
that
really
a
care that
stupid
much.
mistake. Because
See, you
in
should have
a
covered
couple of
more.
years, the whole region was just awash in all these hate crimes from all these people moving up to the Panhandle and Western Montana and Eastern Washington and committing all these hate crimes. And it culminated in '84 with the Order and their rampage. This was a guy named Robert Matthews who moved up from Arizona. And of course, this is, I think, one of the sort of essential stories in Blood in the Face, partly because that happened in '84, of course, the year that he was covering the election. And there were all kinds of, he knew about Gordon Call and all the Posse Comitatus stuff that we were seeing a fair amount of in the Northwest. And if you were covering this stuff as a reporter, you knew this stuff was going on. But we were, tried to be judicious about how we reported on it because we didn't want to give them free publicity. And, it was a big lesson that, these guys thrive in darkness. They fester in darkness. If you want to deal with them in your community, you need to shine a very bright light on them and keep that light focused on them, because then they scatter. So in the 90s,
you guys should spend all your time covering the far right.
I was really first starting to freelance, because I'd been in newsroom work all those the years before that. But I decided, I can kind of see the direction media was going, and I went, well, I need to start writing my own stuff. So I started freelancing then, and I decided, I basically wound up doing two stories as my, two different sort of tracks as my primary journalism output. And one was writing about killer whales, because I was an environmental reporter, but had an investigative background. And so I started writing about killer whales as kind of the consummate Pacific Northwest outdoors or environmental story. But then I also started writing about militias that were organizing as an anti-environmental backlash story that was happening in the Northwest. We had the militia Montana folks organizing out here, and it was all the same stuff. And fortunately, and I did have this background. I grew up in southeastern Idaho, a non-Mormon among a heavily Mormon culture. I think 72% of my graduating class was LDS. But we had this whole culture in the 60s, especially, of John Bircherism. We were just awash in conspiracism. So all this stuff that I was hearing about, even into the 90s, about the constitutionalism and the stuff that the kind of conspiracy theories that the Posse Comitatus types were hawking and selling, and then who the militia types were selling. This is all very familiar stuff to me, because it was conspiracy theories I'd grown up with. So it was really easy for me to sort of dive into this stuff because I knew the subject. And yeah, but the thing about Jim's book that he made really clear, I had this really fairly regionally oriented background, and Jim's book gave me a very expansive view of where this stuff was coming from, how long it had been around, and what its origins were. And so I began doing the historical research. It actually tied in with, I had been doing a long project about the Japanese American internment during the 90s, which I eventually wrote a book about called Strawberry Days. But and there actually is a huge crossover between the Japanese American internment and
Why are
and
you
this
talking
stuff
about
because
Trump? This is
it was
supposed
all
to be a
built
presentation
around
about
these
Trump.
conspiracy theories that were drummed up by these far-right nativists who operating between 1900 and 1942, who created this whole mythology about these Japanese farmers that had come to the West Coast beginning really in 1890. And so I did, I had this background dealing with that, but you could see, the huge connection between their conspiracism and their nativism and what the Ku Klux Klan was doing, because of course the Klan was also very much in favor of the internment, but they were out of the picture by then. But it was a lot of the same actors, a lot of the same people were involved, and certainly a lot of the same
We should ask
sort
him
of
about Nick
conspiracism.
if we get a chance.
So,
what do you think of Nick Fuentes?
yeah, in Jim's book, because it had
We should
all
definitely
this
ask that.
history in it, really tied everything together for me and enabled me to kind of start looking forward to, well, so where are we going with this? And when I started blogging in 2003, that was kind of the subject of my blog. I was talking, really, the focus of it was writing about how right-wing extremism was invading the mainstream and was seeping its way into the mainstream, because I could see it happening in the 90s, but back then it was a distinct thing. And but here's the thing: people don't think about this, but what we called the militia movement, they called the Patriot movement, and it has been called the Patriot movement since the 90s, into the 2000s, and into the Tea Party era, when it essentially took over the Tea Party. And then when Donald Trump came along, he started calling all of his followers patriots. And this was, the Patriot movement is MAGA, and MAGA is the Patriot movement. It's basically what MAGA is now the remnants of, or what the evolution of the old militia movement. And
really,
I don't think people appreciate that or understand it.
Then
but
why didn't they show up with guns?
That's actually
on
what
January
we're
6th?
dealing with, what we've been dealing with since 2015. And I happen
MAGA
to
is a
have
militia
that
movement.
background that let me identify that right away.
Uh-huh.
So,
in the original edition of Blood in the Face, the 1990 edition, ended with this kind of warning or cautionary tale, in which Jim said, the fringe is becoming the fabric, particularly the fabric of the mainstream Republican Party. And we've seen that just come to its ultimate fruition now. And I wonder, Rick, as a historian of the Republican Party, do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, I want to maybe start answering that question with a question for you, Gene, which is how, when this book came out in 1990, was it received? Was it just like, why are you bothering with these lunatics who don't have anything to do with anything?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, first of all, there were many death threats, and thank God there was, not social media and things like that back then. So Jim couldn't be canceled, but, he got lots of calls, and so certainly the far right itself, although there were members of the far right who were happy to, become more notorious as a result of his book. There was also a film called Blood in the Face that came out in 1991 to accompany the first edition of the book, and that film was sold to PBS, for example, and PBS decided not to show it because they didn't want to amplify. And this is, something that you brought up, David, about in your early career, this question of, do you want to amplify and give credence to these thoughts and beliefs, or do you want to, not cover them? And Jim was always a big believer in shining the light, and, the first thing you have to do is open your eyes if you want to fight back. So, there was some pushback even then.
yeah.
And also, yes, there was some reception of this as, why give all this space to these kooky fringe elements? And both the original edition and the new edition, reproduce writing from inside the movements, these zines and now everything's online, of course, but
if you want to fund my videos, you can head over to Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com, link in the description below, and you can sign up for $8 a month, $80 a year. You can also send super chats, and there are many other ways as well, but those are the two best.
Also think something that he always argued that, is very clear is that
how do they
it's
fund?
never just about anti-government.
I just fucked that up. I read that wrong.
This is Democracy Now!,
I read that
Democracy
wrong, and I was trying to be
Now.
fancy, and now I've screwed up the whole live stream. How do they fund their videos? They're self-funded. They're self-funded.
It's like you peel the onion.
How do socialists fund their videos? They are almost entirely self-funded. They are not funded by George Soros. They are not funded by the Democrats. They are not progressives. They are not liberals. They are almost entirely self-funded. Don't listen to anyone who tells you that socialists are anything but entirely self-funded. All right, back to the show. Sorry about that.
Very easy to come across, someone on the right where, I like to point out that right-wing politics is just inherently Janus, right? Because everyone knows, maybe kind of, since the Holocaust, let's say, that hardcore anti-Semitism, explicit anti-Semitism is kind of self-canceling for someone who wants any serious attention in the political arena, right?
Yeah, true.
So there's just this ongoing, example after example after example of, people who, put on a bright, happy face, that they show outward to the public, but then to this esoteric inside group, they quote unquote speak the truth, right? And, so many of the stars of this story are stars of the story because they manage this skillfully, whether it's Pat Buchanan, who, to his dying day was on MSNBC almost every day, even though he was talking about how great the Nazis were, and when he ran for president in 2000, or David Duke, whose whole skill, was, on the one hand, he was a guy who, was talking about white power and biological racism, and then put on a suit and smiled and said, hey, I can, become a viable Senate candidate. Was it Senate, David, in 1990 in Louisiana by, talking like Ronald Reagan, right? So and then, for people who are trying to fight this kind of politics, it doesn't really help you in public to just say, oh, they're just a bunch of Nazis, right? So, kind of threading all those needles can be very, very complicated. I mean, a final thought about that is the trope that is so powerful on the right is this idea of this very simple word, truth, the truth, right? So, we have Truth Social. Literally Vivek Ramaswamy's book is called Truth, So there's all these people
Vivek is the
who,
far right, okay.
Fetishize this word truth and say, Donald Trump is so truthful, he's so honest. And, those of us who are like, what are you talking about? He demonstrably lies every single day. But truth is kind of like this code word of this person who really understands that deep down underneath, it's the white republic against the mud people, right? And so the challenge of kind of decoding this kind of language is so powerful. And the smartest people in this world are the ones who almost treat language kind of like a diamond with all these facets, and it kind of glints differently depending on which direction the light sheds from.
Yeah, okay.
And the fact that the people who are kind of most quote unquote courageous, right? So there's a word, like, why aren't more Republicans in Congress brave enough, to stand up to Donald Trump? Well, a lot of them think that they're very brave by going along with Donald Trump, because that means they have the courage not to, surrender the quote unquote truth to, this fallen liberal world, right? So the kind of the way language is used is kind of fundamentally different. And, you know, one of the things, you know, one of my favorite things by David, but it's all over Blood in the Face too, is, you know, a series of articles, essays he wrote about how skillfully Rush Limbaugh, you know, launders stuff that you used to only be able to hear on shortwave radio, right, in the 80s by Posse Comitatus people, and was putting it out to 10, 20 million people a day, you know,
oh no,
by
not Rush.
the 1990s on
Oh,
AM
no.
radio. And now, of course, it's in the White House. And the people who are always the most admired in this world are the people who explicitly say what other people only say in code.
Right. It used to be dog whistle, and now you don't need the dog whistle anymore. You can come right out and say it.
Right.
The truth
Although
is
there's
the
still
code.
a lot of
Yeah.
dog whistling. It's
Yeah.
like I'm, you know, one of these congressional staffers on the right turns out to have a, you know, secret code name, you know, like one of the guys in
Blue
Doge,
balls?
I think,
Blue
you know,
balls?
was, you know,
Say blue
saying, you know,
balls. Say it.
you couldn't pay me enough to, you know, marry someone outside my ethnic group, you know, under a, you know, code name. So there's still dog whistles.
Yeah.
Someone
Wow,
asked
that's
about
very
Nick
true.
Fuentes. Someone asked them,
Yeah,
can you tell us about Nick
I want to
Fuentes?
say that we are
Very
very happy
innocently,
to take
only one person.
questions from those of you who are listening. So
Wasn't that
please go
related
ahead
to Nick
and
Fuentes?
write those out,
Someone
and they will get to
and
us.
once one person asked about
And
Nick
also,
Fuentes, no one
I
else.
think, you know,
Okay.
everyone I know probably comes to something like
We
this.
need to do a
thinking,
question like,
well,
wasn't that Doge guy related to Nick Fuentes? What's his deal? Something like that. Something very innocent and curious. Only one person though, so you guys got to pay attention to the chat over there. And if another person asks it, don't ask it. Only one.
to this, and I mean, I will say that, you know, one of the arguments that Jim makes in the book is that a lot of this stuff is emotional cover for the, you know, Heritage Foundation Republican Party
Heritage
to go ahead
Foundation.
and do everything they always dreamed of doing. And we do see that happening now. And also that, you know, a long time ago in our history, there was, you know, success at dividing the working class along racial and ethnic lines to prevent the kind of class solidarity. So the people now
Okay,
identify
good
with
job,
their
Bot. Thank you.
tribe rather than their class. And he thought that was a sort of essential component of, you know, where we ended up today.
exactly right.
With, you know,
Thank
the
you.
working class voting Republican. So I wonder if you guys or any of you who are listening have thoughts about that.
Did you want to say something, David?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, clearly the whole use of race to divide working people by class has been around. I mean, that was clearly what was going on in the early 1900s when the nativists were, you know, dividing people, especially working class people, from, you know, trying to keep unions from gaining ground. And a lot of course, we remember that a lot of what the fascists were about was countering socialists and communists from organizing and preventing them from organizing workers.
Yes!
And that was why so many industrialists backed Hitler, as they saw him as a buffer.
Yes.
And that
Fascism
was
is the opposite of
clearly
communism.
something that was going on in the U.S. That was part of why Henry Ford was this great progenitor of the protocols of the Seven Elders of Zion, this, you know, the conspiracy theory, anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. Ford was the guy who actually inspired Hitler to pick that up. Ford, and he distributed it all throughout the States. And so in the 1920s, when the Klan actually controlled much of the country, they controlled legislatures in states like Indiana and Oregon, and they had millions of members all across the country. And that was, and they were seen as basically a sort of chamber of commerce thing. And, you know, it was good government and we were going to practice good eugenics, and they used all those racial things as a way of defanging the union movement, the labor movement. And that was a lot of what they were actually directing it against. And yeah, and Jim was one of the first journalists who really picked up on that, I think, as well.
I definitely have, I've been giving two answers to people who say, kind of what can we do kind of stuff. And one is people are kind of in this incredibly fraught movement are receiving kind of opportunities every day to make kind of very deep decisions, kind of like existentialist novel kind of decisions about whether to keep your head down, right, and just kind of stay safe, or make yourself seen and felt and put something in the way of these people. Because, it's really easy for something bad to happen when no one stands in the way. And I'm just speaking as a Chicagoan, when Homan from ICE, decided Chicago was the first place he was going to go to start, scooping up migrants, the city was extremely well organized, right? We all went to meetings. We all learned exactly what to say, exactly what to do, exactly what to tell people, that they didn't have to open the door, that they didn't have to say anything, that they didn't have to go anywhere, that they needed a warrant for this and they needed a warrant for that. And of course, ultimately, yeah, they can just kick down your door and that's the next step. But the fact of the matter is, Homan went on CNN and said, these people in Chicago are too well trained, so we just kind of left and moved on to the next city. This is why AOC is, under threat, because she's saying these are your constitutional rights, right? You don't have to open your door unless there's a warrant.
They're saying
so
Trump
you get
gave up
lots of
because they're too
opportunities.
organized.
You could be like Columbia University or whatever that law firm was, or you can be like the people that we celebrate in history because, they were the people who said, no, not in my name, right? I mean, we're kind of living in big history right now. The other thing is, and, I don't know if, I think Haymarket is probably a 501c3, but I'm not a 501c3. Unfortunately, there are only two political parties that are on the ballot in America because of the way the laws are set up. One of them is fascist and one of them isn't, right? And you just have to participate in the one party we have that's not fascist. Because, if radicals do it, if non-neoliberal sellouts, get involved in democratic politics, that means that the neoliberal sellouts are, crowded out. And especially at a moment in which there's just this mass discontent with the leadership, the, superannuated gerontocracy running the Democratic Party, showing up at a Democratic meeting right now, Democratic Party meeting can have a lot of effect. I'm in my ward organization and we decide who the candidates are going to be. So, it's a great time to get involved, not just in protest politics, which is very important.
They're going to try to pull
but also
the Democratic Party
partisan
left.
Politics.
That's what they want. Get involved with the Democrats while they're down
you.
to pull
I want to
them
call everyone's attention to a couple of the questions that have come in. What do you think is the best way to counter the conspiracy theories of the right is one question, and the other is, can you explain the groups who are fascist today? Unfortunately, they're kind of running the country.
Neither
but
of those
beyond that,
were asked.
what are the constituent? Maybe David, you could take that question.
Can someone ask about Nick again?
Sure,
Nicely.
I could definitely answer the second question, probably the first one as well. But the second question, when we talk about actual fascist organizations, they range from the Proud Boys, who are a clearly brown shirt style street thug organization in the tradition of the SA and the black shirts, and classically proto-fascist, and all their attitudes.
Someone ask
and
about
outlooks.
Nick right now. Someone ask about Nick specifically.
Don't do is go
what
on
about this Nick Fuentes character?
Rounding people up into camps, but I'm sure that's coming. And outfits like the Oath Keepers, who try to provide a sort of paramilitary presence or for Donald Trump and his followers for the MAGA movement. And then you have people like Nick Fuentes and, the overt white nationalists. His is called America First. They held an annual conference and they're just nakedly white nationalists. I mean, they don't, and openly anti-Semitic too, I might add. And then we have a number of others that are what I would call sort of para-fascist or pseudo-fascist. They're right on the border of being openly fascist, and including like Turning Point USA, people like that. And what they all are profoundly is deeply authoritarian, and they're really urging and promoting an authoritarian politics, and they're leaning into the appeal to authoritarian personalities that all of these movements have. So.
And the other question, what's the best way to counter the conspiracy theories of the right, Rick?
You don't need to apologize.
Yeah, I mean, the conspiracy theories are so cunning and dangerous because they're so all-consuming, right? And you can argue with someone about the contradictions in what they believe until you're blue in the face, right? I mean, the classic conspiracy theory is that Jews are the bankers running Germany and they're also the communists who are destroying Germany, right? Well, they can't be true at the same time.
They can be true at the same time. They can.
The way I think of it is, a lot of what it's like to be in the Republican Party and supporting Donald Trump right now, and this is nothing original with me, is it really is like, a cult-like formation, right? And one surrenders to a cult because one is looking for easy answers and one wants to salve the anxieties of everyday life. And there really is kind of like a very narrow membrane between, being over here and the regular reality where things are messy and there are no easy answers. And then there's this membrane, and then you just kind of go over to here, and then suddenly you have all these answers, and you're just, putty in their hands, right?
Oh, yeah,
and
that's exactly
I think
what
it's
like,
really
yeah.
important to kind of find the people who are kind of near the middle of that, right? And again, once again, show up. It's like if you have people in your life, don't try and argue with them, but just humanize yourself, right? David and I have a mutual friend named Sarah Robinson, who was and probably is very big on, just being in rural spaces and saying liberals are people like, just like you and me, right? It's like, everyone's leaving Twitter. I don't leave Twitter. I just kind of like because there's so many people on Twitter, it's kind of like what David said, right? When him and his newspaper publisher were like, well, if we ignore them, we won't be giving them attention, right? Well, if you leave Twitter and don't argue with people, then they think that, someone who's in that middle realm will think that the only logic, the only truth exists on this side, the cult side of the question. So, I have a dear grade school friend, who, on my Facebook page was clearly becoming kind of, Trump curious. He started out kind of being annoyed at, how messy and angry politics were. And, when I did a post saying, hey guys, we're trying this thing where we're not, going to buy anything on, March 29th or whatever it was. I don't know if that was a good idea for a protest or a bad idea for a protest. But my point is that this old friend of mine, this very, very sweet guy who I adored, always adored since 8th grade, made a joke. He said, I'm just going to buy everything I can that day. And I just, slipped into his DMs and said, hey, look at this, look at this, look at this. And then another time, he said, when I criticized Doge, he's like, well, in my job, I get audited, And so again, I slipped into his DMs and said, well, if they fire all the, tax collectors, how does that make the government more efficient? A lot of it is just kind of reaching people on a very intimate and human level, right? And requires a mode of address that maybe, combativeness has its role, and I can be extremely combative, but maybe is a little less combative than, kind of your instinct, kind of kind of dictates you. But I think, just finding people who are just, kind of like on the edge of moving from the scary real world to the supposedly safe, kind of conspiracy world. And, it's like they're so good. They're so good at, Steve Bannon is so good at this, love bombing vulnerable people and saying, over here it's safe, right? Well, we got to be able to look people in the eye and say, no, over here it's safe. I got your back. It's all very abstract what I'm saying, but hopefully I'm kind of communicating something useful.
Yeah, and I think that's something the left is really bad at.
Right. No, like, oh, I agree with you on 20 things, but I agree with you on this 21st thing. So, you're a fascist. No,
right.
That's no circular firing squad.
Happens a lot.
And,
yeah.
Academic distinctions when they line us up against the wall, liberals, radicals, they hate us all.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing.
You think the right is going to line you up against the wall, bro? No, that's the left.
This actually helps, I think, explain the question we just got, which is why are people so spineless on our side? Because they don't. We actually have a sort of reflexive thing to avoid conflict.
Yeah.
And
oh yeah, the left avoids conflict.
Yeah. I mean,
okay.
People ask me what to do. I mean, some of it you do have to watch out for your own. Protect yourself. You can't just dive into these harried situations where guys can be screaming in your face and you're never going to get anywhere. There's no point in even engaging in that kind of stuff. But if you can have a normal conversation with people who have fallen down these rabbit holes, you at least have a chance of persuading them that we're not all evil. I mean, as you know, Rick, I recorded. When I was working for Crooks and Liars, my job was to record Fox every day.
I should reach out to them and be like, do you want to talk?
Pull clips from it. And it just really struck me over the years why how they would create this demonized version of what a liberal is.
Yeah.
That was just totally unrecognizable. And yet this is what a regular Fox viewer, I realized, because I had people in my own family that were watching Fox News all the time. And
it is true that Fox News does not understand what a liberal is. True.
Idea in their heads that that I hate them, that all of us who are liberals, we all hate America, we all hate people.
We all hate them.
We all hate them. We have nothing but contempt for them. And of course, this is something that was the essence of Limbaugh's shtick, of course. That was what Limbaugh told people beginning in the early 90s, is that those liberals hate you. Alex Jones has been telling people this for years as well. And that's the thing, is that I think you have a chance, at least, if you can convince somebody who's a dedicated Fox watcher that no, we're not all.
Do these people think the far right is Fox
satanic
News?
Assholes who want to, we perform abortions 2 hours after birth, right? Which is what Trump and people have been saying, things like that. And so I mean, that's I think
that's
really
a good idea,
key, but also, to actually engage. I mean, ultimately, I would say that
actually,
one
no,
thing
Bot,
that
do
I've
that.
been doing,
I take that back. Do that.
Especially since I retired, but even before
if we
that,
can get them to say there'll be a
retired from
takeover
daily
and they say the
reportage,
same thing as James, that'll be funny to clip together.
And I've been
So do
kind of
that,
focusing
please.
on it
Thank
just in
you.
my daily life, is to, if I want to be the antithesis of fascism, I need to be generous and kind.
Yeah.
Because
say something like, I saw a guy named James Lindsay give a speech where he said there was going to be a total fascist takeover of the United States in the next couple months. Do you agree? That's what you say.
Ethics is tolerance. But what happens when you tolerate someone who's intolerant, right? It's literally this philosopher, Karl Popper, the Popper's paradox, right? I mean, with the spinelessness issue, it's like there are just so many spineless Democrats, right? There's nothing we can do to kind of make this generation of Democrats not spineless. I mean, literally, in his an interview recently, Chuck Schumer said that Donald Trump weaved a spell over the Republican Party, and when he goes away, it'll go back to the way it was, right? I mean, it's just they're demented people, right? So, to me, the answer to
Thanks,
how do you
Bob.
deal with spineless Democrats is, people who are not spineless have to be Democratic activists and not say the Democrats are so fallen and corrupt that I don't want to have anything to do with them, right?
These are
I mean,
not
that's
Democrats.
just surrendering.
Stop calling these people. These are not. These
Yeah,
are
I think there's
socialists,
also a
bro. These are not
political
Democrats.
angle or a problem there too, in that there's so many people who run as Democrats who
These are not on the same team as Democrats.
think they have to
Reach
sort
out.
of meant. Well, they feel like they have to sort of mediate and ameliorate their own positions constantly in order to be appealing to this great middle of the voters. And my argument has always been that no, actually, this great middle of voters is sitting there and judging you, and they can tell whether you're spineless or not.
No,
And
that's kind of a paradox to it.
if you don't stand up for the principles of what you believe, if you don't defend transgender people, not because you have this woke idea of defending transgender people, but because you believe in a democracy where all people are welcome and have a place, and if you can't talk about that, if you can't explain why you support these people who are being demonized and attacked in right-wing attacks, if you can't explain that, then you really don't belong in politics in the first place.
Right. I mean, I think there's a kind of another one of these paradoxes is, since the Republicans are such assholes and so aggressive and so violent tempered, well, you have to be the opposite of that. You have to be mild, right? And that's just a like one of the things we used to talk about a lot back in the old blogosphere days, David, is there was lots of polls showing that people voted for George W. Bush, even though they disagreed with every policy position he had, because they said, well, he really seems to believe, in his gut, that he's right.
Types.
And the other guy,
they're socialists, but
he's
they're
so
not
wishy-washy, right?
Right.
I mean, it's just a question of respect. I mean, why would you respect someone who doesn't seem to have the courage of their convictions, right? So, when you meet a Republican halfway, that often just makes it easier for the Republican to spit on you. Right. when you reach out the hand of fellowship, it becomes really easy for the Republican to just, smash your hand, right?
I think of how Trump grabs people and pulls them towards them when he does his handshakes with
and all we need to do is see how many people are hungry for Democrats with backbones.
Right.
See, Bernie and AOC getting 30,000 people in Denver,
Right.
The biggest political crowd in the history of the city, and, Chuck Schumer has to, cancel his book tour because no one wants to have anything to do with him, So, but if you have a spine, well, maybe the Democrats need you.
We have a question saying, how close do you think we are to an outright fascist takeover? And another question earlier that I thought was interesting about the direct overlap of the far right and some of the richest people in the country. Is that a new development?
Reagan, I think that's you.
Oh, no. Tell them about H.L. Hunt, right?
Yeah, and not to mention Henry Ford.
Yeah, Henry Ford. I mean,
Yeah.
H.L. Hunt was an oil wildcatter who was famous in the 50s as the richest man in America.
It's not the
and he
important
was
question.
basically the funder of all the far-right racist organizations. He wrote a speculative novel in which he proposed that the number of votes you got was based on how much money you had, right? So it's always been the Mercers. It's like the most extreme people are often these right-wing super zillionaires because it kind of they get seized by this narcissism that they're kind of this kind of aristocratic class that everyone has to bow down to.
That's an odd
Yeah,
answer.
yeah. Elon Musk is just the latest iteration of that. We've seen these kind of ultra rich people for a very long time. I mean, Fritz Thiessen. Think of Fritz Thiessen. You know, he basically he was the guy behind all the armament, German armaments, and he was he and the steelmaker Farben were making a lot of the weapons for were responsible for manufacturing much of the German war machine. And of course he was a big supporter of Hitler's, but within about 4 years he was under house arrest.
I saw someone asked about was that question was it kind of the Reagan era that kind of led the Democrats to kind of give up on the courage of their convictions? I think the Reagan victory in 1980 was really traumatizing. And a lot of the people who became the biggest kind of trimmers and triangulators were people who lost in that election. Bill Clinton lost the Arkansas governor's race in 1980. Joe Lieberman lost his race for attorney general. And I think it was really kind of came out of nowhere because people, the discourse, the rhetoric was that Reagan was crazy and no one was going to vote for him. And when Reagan won a landslide, it just really broke a lot of people's brains, and the Democrats are still kind of recovering from that. And that's why it's so important, to kind of replace the kind of, bad generation of Democrats with a younger generation of Democrats. I'm a very strong believer in that. It's like half the time I'm really glad I'm not writing as much anymore because I think, I'm ready to kind of hand it over to people who are actually building their lives and have a much stronger sense of, where the pressure points are,
Yeah, I'm not, I'm glad to be retired, partly because I was, for 5 years, was out covering this stuff on the street. I was in the middle of about 20 different Proud Boys rallies and things like that. And I just don't need that kind of violence in my life. So, but I do have a lot of fear and dread of what's coming if these guys start doing their stochastic terrorism thing.
Yeah.
And we've already seen it, of course, to some extent with, I was going to mention this earlier, that, the people who tried to, you were talking about how in Chicago, they prepared for the Homan people to do the immigrant pickups, do these immigrant sweeps. Well, even before then, we had a situation here in Western Washington where a local elementary school held an event that was designed to inform immigrants of their constitutional rights. And it was all about, here's how you can prepare for what's coming. And it was, it was a public thing. Libs of TikTok got a hold of this, and they wound up shutting the thing down because they were just swarmed with all these threats. And basically it got depicted as they're teaching them how to evade ICE, and how to avoid the law. Which is of course what these nativists do. And I really think, and this sort of gets back to how we defend each other. If we're going to defend each other, first of all, we have to link arms. And this kind of event is one of the ways we link arms. But then when we link arms, we can't get scared. We can't let them scare us off.
Well,
and of course,
scaring is natural, but we just have to face our fears and work like all the great, heroes of history have.
Yeah, and it's easy to convince people who understand the moment. It's not easy to convince people who don't recognize the moment, particularly if they're administrators in the local school districts, or they're people who are just suddenly flabbergasted that this mob is descending on them and freak out and
you mean
flip
parents?
switches.
You mean parents,
rather
that
than
type of mom,
understanding,
parents?
now this is an important moment where we all have to stand up and face these people down. And ultimately, that's what it takes. Is I don't think, it's going to, I mean, somebody asked earlier, how close are we to a fascist movement? And I think sometimes when I see this stuff happening, I think we may be closer than we think. I think certainly
He agrees with James.
we're very close when we see Tom Holman threatening AOC.
James
I
agrees
think
with
if
literal
they
socialists.
start arresting people who stand up to them, and particularly prominent figures like AOC and Bernie and people like that.
Please do it.
I think that I think all bets are off.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the extent to which we're really close to a kind of a fascist reality is the amount of people who accept a haze of unreality as reality, right? I mean, to me, it's, yes, the physical stuff, the violent stuff is really important. The administrative stuff is really important. The legal stuff is really important. But when your neighbor thinks that, Elon Musk is a super genius who knows how to fix the U.S. government, that's insane. That's ridiculous. But, lots more people believe that than are, willing to, smack someone across the face who defends an immigrant. And that's, to me, what is really scary, because then you get into the dark realm of
Elon Musk is literally
online algorithms, and the fact that, as I point out, any fascist lie that Elon Musk decides is a truth, or he's going to pretend is the truth, and he puts on Twitter, is going to be seen in front of more people's eyes than any sentence I ever write in my life, right? And to me, that's the most fascist thing we're dealing with right now.
Just returning to historical context, and that the book traces. I mean, one thing you see when you read the whole thing through is that this stuff has to some extent been cyclical, and whenever progress is made in terms of racial justice or, class justice, beginning with, let's say, Reconstruction, there's always been a backlash, and sometimes a really powerful backlash. Yeah. And, we've been talking about the 1920s when there were tens of thousands of people in their Klan robes marching down Pennsylvania Avenue to the White House. And, Anaheim was called Klanaheim because everybody had Klan barbecues every weekend. What? And there was, a terribly oppressive anti-immigration bill passed in, was it 1924? That, among other things, prevented, we don't know how many Jews from escaping the Holocaust and coming to the United States. So...
Yeah, one of the problems is that whenever there's a progressive breakthrough, like think about how people felt when, Obama was elected, something in a lot of people's memory, there's this kind of sense that the work is done. I write about this a lot in my books, there was this Time magazine, said that American women were the man of the year in 1976 or 5 or something like that. And I loved this quote in which they're like, the feminism is so universally accepted that, it's just, there's no way anything can happen, and Phyllis Schlafly, kind of came out like a Scirocco, the next year, and just completely out-organized the left and beat the ERA. So, just being aware that, progress brings a backlash would be a lot of progress, because we just do this again and again and again. I remember when, Bill Clinton was elected in 1992, and I was in graduate school, and my advisor said, she's a baby boomer, and she said, "Oh, Rick, I feel like just like it was when Kennedy was elected, and just this everyone wants to kind of declare the, sort of the final victory of what is just fundamentally American. These deeply seated, dark, vicious, bigoted parts of our history. But luckily we have other resources in our history, and we have to kind of call on those. We have to achieve our country, as James Baldwin said.
Yeah, I don't think it's I don't think there's anyone questions now that the Trump presidency is a reaction to the Obama presidency. Was the backlash to the Obama presidency, and they're still getting revenge for it. I mean, they still talk about it. You go and listen to Trump's crowds, and they still bring up Obama and the Obama years as you know, and they can never tell you exactly what was so bad about Obama's presidency, just like they can't really tell you what was so bad about Biden's presidency. Oh, well, he opened the borders. Yeah, no.
Or Kennedy's presidency or Roosevelt's presidency. I
Joe
mean,
Biden wasn't conscious
it's kind of
during
depressing
his
how
presidency.
predictable this stuff is. But
Joe Biden literally has
um,
dementia.
resistance
And he
also
always did.
is a effective backlash, and like I say, we have a lot of heroic stuff to draw on. I'm really struck by something I read once. I read someone who said that the greatest thing Martin Luther King ever accomplished was that he taught Black people in the South that actually when you get beaten up, you don't die, and it's not as scary as you might have thought it might be. And once they realized that, and people started putting their bodies in the streets, they broke the back of a lot of stuff. Not everything, but a lot of this will be putting, our bodies on the line. And the more people who are willing to do it, the less far they're going to be able to get.
Yeah, I think we have to be prepared for the stochastic terrorism. We have to be able to organize against it. Because they are going to be doing things where they're identifying targets and broadcasting their names and broadcasting the targets on air and urging people to do stuff to counter them. And I don't, obviously it's going to be important to not let that succeed because that is how they succeed. That's how they win. And by scaring everybody, by frightening everybody into submission. And that's why they do this style of politics, the constant bellicose screaming in people's faces and that sort of thing. It's really transformed American politics. I mean, there are certain things that have happened in the Trump years that genie's gotten out of the bottle that I don't know we'll ever put back, and particularly in terms of counting the elections, counting the votes. I don't think we'll ever have, since 2020, I don't think we're going to have any future election that I can think of where counting of votes isn't going to be a central issue, especially, honestly, in the 2024 election, I think there's a very possible likelihood that, these guys actually did somehow manage to manipulate the votes.
They're accusing Trump.
I mostly say that because
right?
Yeah.
A literal insurrection.
I mostly
right
say
now.
that because they're clearly acting now like they don't think they're going to have to face the voters again. This just raises all kinds of suspicions for me. There's just way too much hinky behavior around, not just around the election itself, but around how they're behaving now.
Musican, that's a
they
great
clearly don't seem to think that they're going to have to deal with the voters again. And that worries me.
Right. Thanks, Elena.
So do you feel like this is another cycle, or is this, the beast slouching toward Bethlehem? Is this categorically different?
I mean, we've seen worse, right? I mean, the Civil War almost had 1 million people die, right? Hopefully we can, transcend without that sort of thing. But, societies have non-violently transformed themselves in very profound ways. South Africa is one example, right? Indian independence is another, right? And, I mean, it's quite remarkable. There's a really wonderful book by Thomas Ricks, who was the Washington Post military correspondent in Iraq. And it's about Martin Luther King as a military strategist. And he pointed out, it's fascinating stuff, because one of the things he points out is like Martin Luther King never had a protest without, some sense of what that protest was an increment towards, And we don't ever do that, right? We don't ever think about kind of what's next after this protest? How do we build power for the next protest? And, I mean, it's like,
that do,
in a media society, nonviolence, putting the evil of our adversaries on display, soul force, as Martin Luther King called it, it can be incredibly powerful stuff. So, there are, like I say, lots of resources of hope that we can draw on.
That makes me think of something that Jim told me back to that 1984 presidential race, that, nobody cared about the Republican and Democratic parties in these small farming communities where he was going, where these far-right groups had so much appeal. But there were some people who were going to Jesse Jackson rallies, of all things, and relating to the message that Jackson had.
Jesse Jackson, because somehow he was treated as, sort of somehow kind of black nationalist, when everyone knew, who was involved in that movement, that it really was a rainbow coalition. And actually Walter Mondale did send Jesse Jackson around the country to talk about things like, farm foreclosures and the minimum wage, and he was incredibly effective.
Right.
And it's, that was kind of what scared the neoliberals in the Democratic Party. Wasn't that he was a black nationalist, but that he was actually a multicultural activist.
Right. And these were the farmers who were facing foreclosures on their farms that had been in the families for generations. And it reminds me of what you said, Rick, about an explanation for everything that's going wrong in your life. Like, you're not the failure, it's the...
That's right.
So we have to have a counter narrative to that, it's the, the Jews and the black people taking your jobs and the immigrants taking your jobs. There's got to be another story behind that, and the story behind it is obvious what it should be. But
and Chuck Schumer ain't telling that story, but maybe he is,
Well, and this gets back to
I'm going to clip that out of context. It's going to be
saying
great.
about how we just lack a spine because we don't stand up for our actual principles. I mean, immigration's really a classic case where, it's really a pretty simple thing to stand up for saying immigration's good for the country. Immigrants play a key role in making our economy work. They play a key role in building our communities, and especially they play, it's really easy. They shape our communities. Yes, it's going to look different because they come from different cultures, but you find ways to ameliorate that. You lean into promoting immigrants, and you try to make the system so it actually works, and you don't have this huge class of people who are undocumented, which is only a product, really, of the utter failure of both Democrats and Republicans to pass comprehensive immigration reform. Because there is a solution to all this, and it's just a matter of passing laws that, the Republicans go, oh, it's amnesty, and it's not amnesty, but
it is,
we have to, Democrats aren't courageous enough to lean into this stuff and push back. Instead, they go...
Meeting them halfway on immigration is just so tactically disastrous. I always point out to people, I have kind of a little jujitsu move when I get into arguments with, I pick fights with people on X, about this stuff. And I say...
I'll pick a fight with you,
there's so much philo-Semitism, especially on the Christian right. And I say, hey, guys, if we had the immigration policies you guys want, in the early 20th century, I wouldn't exist and my grandparents would have been a lampshade, It's like, oh,
fake news,
right.
Actually, Rick.
And
fake news,
I mean, sometimes when you point out that the same things, that people say now about Venezuelans are what they were saying about the Irish, in the 1840s. Sometimes you can the scales can fall from people's eyes. Not always. It's not a magic bullet. But like I say, there are lots of resources of hope we have.
The first chapter of Blood in the Face is called Native Americans, and it's very much about how every single generation of immigrants claimed that they were the real Americans, and that the generation that followed them, were the interlopers who were going to, devalue American values.
Well, Google what Benjamin Franklin had to say about the Germans.
The Germans, exactly. Rick, we're going to lose you in a moment. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any final words?
I mean, I'm really grateful for Haymarket, a great American institution, a great Chicago institution. And I'm just really proud to be fighting alongside everyone within the sound of my voice. We shall overcome.
We shall overcome.
Thank
Struggle,
you.
comrade.
Thanks so much. David, any last words from you?
To go back to what you were just saying, out of that first chapter about real Americans, it's certainly central to, I think, everything that I've
bunch of questions in, Reagan.
And
don't worry.
Fascinatingly enough, this idea of being the real Americans is also a central component of authoritarian personalities. It's called conventionalism, and they both, there are three behavioral and attitudinal clusters that form authoritarian personalities. The first is authoritarian submission to the glorious leader. The other is authoritarian aggression, which is aggression directed against people who fail to submit. And then finally, the third is conventionalism, this idea that they represent the real Americans. And it really ties in, especially with right-wing extremists. They all think of themselves as heroes. It's one of the things that is in Umberto Eco's Fascism essay, as he talks about how in fascist society everyone is educated to be a hero. And that's very much true. I mean, think about what the most popular movie genre of the last 15 years has been. It's been superhero movies. We've got a society that's just primed for this stuff because everybody wants to be a friggin' hero. I mean, certainly that's true. Every right-wing extremist, especially the domestic terrorists that I wrote about, they've all seen themselves from Robbie Matthews to Timothy McVeigh to Shauna Ford to Dylan Roof. They all see themselves as heroes out to save America. And this is really central to the sort of violence that comes with right-wing extremism.
And we all know that the real heroes are the people who accept their vulnerability and see themselves as, members of a community. So There it is.
Right, and who form bonds with others and link up with others and take care of others. Those are the really strong people. But we've got this really perverted idea of masculinity and strength that is an outgrowth of authoritarianist movements. Yeah.
Well, I really love that, what you both said as a wrapping up point, because it's deep and hopeful. I do want to remind people that the book is available everywhere, online and in local bookstores. And if they don't have it, please ask for it. It really is important to see where we've come from, to know where we're going. And thank you so much, David and Rick, and thank you, Haymarket, for believing in this book. And thank you all for being here tonight.
Namaste, motherfuckers.
Wow. Stunning and brave, Rick. Stunning and brave. Stunning
Thanks
and brave.
a lot, everyone.
All right, guys, that concludes the live socialism stream. I mean, we got some great quotes, I have to say. More just funny stuff. Listen, I don't think those guys on that stream were hardcore socialists. I think they were more like... They're like DSA type socialists. I mean, they're definitely far left, and they're definitely like unhinged, but they're more like, they're like on the cusp of progressive and DSA, but they're not radical revolutionary socialists. So it could have been way worse, but at least they said some funny things that we can laugh at them about. Thank you guys for spending some time on the stream with me today. I really do appreciate it. Tomorrow, as a reminder, we are doing Counter-Revolutionary Book Club. We are going to start doing Counter-Revolutionary Book Club every Thursday. We're going to get it on a consistent schedule. Counter-Revolutionary Book Club is where we read some of the most far-left, dystopian, gender, queer, abolish the family, insanity texts that you've ever read in your life, except they are real. These are the real things that queer activists, that gender activists are reading, that inspire them, that drive the strategies that they're trying to implement, that drive everything they're doing in schools. And I promise you, if you have not read these documents, you do not understand the far left. You do not understand queer ideology. You don't understand what the left is really doing. These documents will tell you that. So, for tomorrow's reading, you can find this over on my Substack. That is Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. It's right on the homepage right now. Tomorrow we are reading a document called The Gender Accelerationist Manifesto. I've actually done a previous analysis on this document for the Inner Circle podcast. I did it last year. That was before I invented the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club, and I knew I read it again because The Gender Accelerationist Manifesto is insane. Okay, so if you want to get a head start, you can head over to the Substack and you can find the text over on the Substack. You can also just go to Anarchist Library. You just Google Gender Accelerationist Manifesto. All of the texts that we're reading in the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club are freely available, so you don't have to pay money for it or anything, because socialists do not believe in intellectual property, and so they just put it out on the internet. You can download it, get it a head start for tomorrow. You can also head over and go to the Substack and click on Book Club right at the top, and you can catch past episodes of the podcast. We've done 7 episodes. We've done Towards the Queerest Insurrection. We've done polyamory and queer anarchism, and we did a 4-part series on Against the Gender Nightmare because it was so long. So hopefully Gender Accelerationist Manifesto will give us a little bit of less talking that we need to do. And I want to remind everyone that you can indeed subscribe to the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club on Apple Podcasts, also on Spotify. And if you happen to be an Apple Podcast, go and give it a 5-star review. Go give it a nice review on Spotify. I love more people listening to this stuff, guys. And honestly, I've actually been pretty surprised at how many people have been listening to this. And it's really awesome that people are listening to the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club, because this is the crazy stuff, and this is the important stuff, and this is the stuff that people are not talking about as much as they should be, I think. So we'll talk about it here. And if you feel like supporting the work I'm doing, you can do so over at my Substack. That is Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. You can sign up for a membership of $8 a month, $80 a year. You guys keep me in business. I am 100% funded by you. So please make sure you join the Substack. Please make sure you're supporting the work I'm doing if you want to see it continue. And you get all sorts of perks like my supporter Discord, like Zoom calls that we do every Monday, some other stuff too. And you can sign up for that over on the Substack. And with that, guys, I am going to take my leave. I take my leave of you for today, but I will be back tomorrow for Counter-Revolutionary Book Club. So take care, guys. Have a good rest of your night, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
How are you feeling? How long have you been here?
3 months, May 17th.
And what brought you?
That's difficult to answer.
I'm not clear. How is it that playing the piano for people has eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital?
That's difficult to answer.